presentations of what I did here for close to 4 weeks, I think. So this talk is called Sleeping in the Circular Ruins. And we're gonna start about like a little bit of information of who I am. So day to day I'm running a super small studio called Flow Control, and we're doing something you can't really see here, but basically working with technology in usual spaces. So we're either working on like large scale visual art happening with code, or data visualization, some hardware work, some product work, like basically whatever is interesting to me. So creative technologies is the term that I call myself, but I really don't like it, but I haven't found a better one yet. So Sleeping in the Circular Ruins. First of all, about the talk title. Who here knows Jorge Luis Borges? He was awesome one. You need to check Wikipedia and get some of his works. Like, he was this awesome writer that I really love, and most of his work, he wrote very short stories. Like the Circular Ruins is the story that I think is like 3 paragraphs of text about this old guy who comes to these ruins that form a circle, and he goes to sleep there, and everything he dreams about comes to life. And he started to dream about his own son and creating him from scratch, building his heart, his arteries and everything. And it's like really interesting concept of like how thinking makes things into existence. And like there's gonna be a lot of circles in this talk, so I thought that's gonna be like interesting title for it. So I wanted to start with actually a side story. So do you know this quote, maybe? It's from Marshall McLuhan, the same who said that the medium is the message. This is his like the most famous quote. He was a media theorist, and like the one I really like is this one: we shape our tools and then they shape us. So there's really a very strong connection between what you do and with what tools you use to do that thing. So I have, like, the backstory is, I like this, I had a very personal experience with that. So I swear I'm gonna get to the point at some point. But when I started first freelancing and then running the studio, I wrote my own tool for time tracking. So basically calculating how much time I spent on which project. And then over time I added, how much money I made per project. So I knew how much money I made per hour on a given project. And there was this table that being built up over time. And at some point I started sorting this table by how much I make per hour. So all the personal projects or the fun stuff or the stuff like I do here would fall down to the bottom. And of course, like, I knew I still wanted to do these things. I had, like, to-do list and projects and ideas, but subconsciously I started giving them no value over time. And there was this time during, I'm not sure if you can see it, you can't, but there's like a blue line over here that shows like my work at the personal projects throughout a few years. And there's, maybe you can see if you squeeze your eyes, there's this gap for a few good months. That was, I think, beginning of 2016, like a few months leading up to 2016. So I just stopped doing any personal projects completely, and I ended up very depressed, and I didn't know what was happening, and it was really hard to motivate myself to do anything. And only after like thinking about it very deeply, and there was actually another talk about from Devin Vega, who talks about his own time tracking tools, and I understood like this connection that me building this tool in a way that promotes or favors things that make money made me not do the things that I love. So what I could do is, of course, I've built the next one. So this is a visualization that at some point I've built, like, it was the first big project after that hiatus, when I understood what's happening. So I started showing which days I work on work projects, the red bar, and which days I work on a personal project, the blue bar on the bottom. So these are all the days in a year. So you can see 2015, where there was no blue at all, almost, for the second half of the year. And then 2016, when it like clicked and I started doing this stuff again and again. And these tools, of course, keep evolving, and like this is the current version, which I actually run as a new tab in Chrome. So instead of opening blank page or Google or whatever, I open this to force me to look at this. And there's like a few sections that show me not really like if I did work a lot, because I tend to work a lot, but it shows me if I spend some time on my own projects, if I'm trying to keep my good habits going and everything, and it's really helping me. And like this is the point I'm trying to make with this little side story is why I spend all of this time here building tools. It's because I really believe, and like I know they impact what you do and how you do it. So that was a little side story about tools, but I wanted to get to like the core of what is happening. So starting with the idea of liminality, which is like the difference between like liminality itself is, I have a quote, the idea of meaningful borders between related concepts. So one of the things I'm really interested in is the idea of where things like kind of change. So if you imagine you have like single cellular organism, and you can simulate all the processes that happen in that organism. Like we know mathematically all the behaviors of chemistry that happen in that organism, and chemistry changes in biochemistry basically when it's inside a life, which is very like from a biology standpoint a thing that is really not well defined. But if you imagine this cell happening in real life, and the same cell, all the same processes simulated in a computer, like where exactly is the difference? And where's the difference between like this liminality between something being alive and something being simulated to be alive? So I'm really interested in this concept of computer programs and algorithms that are kind of borrowed from nature. So this one is called space colonization, and what is happening here, it's kind of there are some invisible points that simulate food, and this form tries to grow out where the food is basically. And this is what's happening with fungal growth basically. There's like the fungal cells just float in the air, and when it lands on some rotten food, it starts to grow out in the place where the food is basically. Like it's not moving, it's just growing towards the food. So this is like very rough simulation of that, but what you can do with that is an interactive installation that I did, I think 6 years ago, which was basically this, but the food, instead of being random, was from the movement of people inside around that installation. So it was projected, but then all the movement that people did, like walking around, produced the food where the shape grew and then died out. If no one was moving, if no one was watching it, it would die out. This one is basically trying to divide the space and make the little cells stick to each other, but not so close that they overflow each other. This one, let me skip forward. This one is called diffusion limited aggregation, or Laplacian growth, and it's basically a bunch of points floating in the air, and when they hit one that is already stick to something, it sticks as well. And this is exactly like how algae grows like a coral reef grows in the ocean. There's a bunch of cells floating in the water. Some of them are already stationary. If they hit each other, they stick to each other, and then it grows and produces this like organically looking output. So all of this that I showed you up to now has been built with one of the libraries that I made here, which is called behaviors, which basically allows me to very quickly do different simulations that produce outputs like that. And here's like some very old, like to hold this all in place, this very old experiment of a 3D form that was growing with the same idea. So instead of points floating in 2 dimensions, then they flow in 3 dimensions and produce this shape. The problem I had with this is this work never led anywhere, and it's also made with tools that I don't really see myself using, so it was kind of forgotten up until now. And this leads me to solids and solid modeling, which is the idea somewhere between like mathematics and computer graphics, which is about like how to model 3D shapes basically. So to go very briefly throughout the process, in 3D you can just put 2 spheres somewhere, and if they overlap each other, you're gonna see something like that, but they are not connected in any way. It wouldn't be possible, for example, to 3D print this without any post-processing. So it's basically just shape overlapping each other. And to fight with that, there's this technique called CSG, constructive solid geometry, which allows you to kind of do Boolean mathematical operations on these shapes. So here I'm taking union of 1 sphere, 2nd sphere, and a cube. So you can see part of this sphere on the left and right are not inside of the cube, they are connected, like the vertices that make up these shapes are all connected, so it's easy to 3D print them. And this works very well, for example, for things like that. So I was designing a case for some hardware I've built, and I knew exactly like how big it has to be, like what are the sizes for screws and everything. So it was simple for me to write, few lines of a computer program that would generate this shape. And constructive solid geometry is very good for that, but it's really hard to make something that looks organic and interesting, like in an artsy way. It's easy to make stuff that really needs to be to like very specific dimensions when you know everything up front. But if I wanted to grow out this shape, this technique is not really great for that. So circling back to that ideas of time tracking and everything, I started at some point like knowing like how the process influences what the outcome is. I started forcing myself to take like a different spins on that. So in 2017 I did a series of monthly projects. So basically each month I would start something, finish it, and publish. And one of the projects I did then, you can see over here, which is it's gonna be a mouthful. It's a visual programming language for generating signed distance function shaders. So what you can see in these three pictures, on the left you can see the visual language. So it's basically boxes connected with lines. So it's a different spin of writing code instead of writing text. You can work with it visually and connect these blocks together. And on the right you can see the shaders generated. So shaders is like a programming language for a GPU. So it's fast in some ways, it's slow in other ways. What is interesting about the signed distance function itself, it's the way it's representing the solids. It's not a set of vertices that build up a mesh. It's describing them by a distance from a point. So it tells you like how far you are from the surface of the object. So this in itself is not that super interesting, but there are some nice qualities that we get from that. So for example, in here on my right, my left, is a shape that would be very hard to make in a usual computer graphics way, where I have a bunch of spheres. You can see like how smooth they are, and I'm cutting out a hexagon throughout them, and it's a 3D shape. So this is something built up from this graph on the left, which we're not concerned about today, but the signed distance function itself allows me like to do this Boolean operation in a very simple way. Basically like calculating an union of two shapes is just minimum of the distance from a surface of one and the second one. So whichever is closest is the surface we care about. Doing intersection would be the separate thing, like whichever is the farthest is the intersecting surface. So this is what I basically worked on during this residency. One of the big tools I've built is allowing me to represent the SDFs in like a, I hope, readable or understandable way. And we're going to get that very soon. So now to the last part of this long introduction is biomimetics. So it's the idea of basically borrowing things, ideas from the nature. And like I'm just gonna show you how this looks like both in code and in the outputs throughout like two of the most important tools I built in this residency. One of them allows me to just display those things, and actually what I can do with them is not only display them in the raw form in the distances, but also convert them through like some complex mathematics I don't really understand to meshes. So I can grab the vertices, like basically walk over the surface and get all the vertices that I care about, and it produces a 3D printable output. So it gets like all that I wanted. So basically this is on the left here, all of the code we need to get to this sphere. So first few lines is just grabbing the basic like functions that I wrote. Then there's in the middle is that shape that we care about, and then some other incantations to get it on the screen. What we really care about actually is just that shape thing. So if you focus on that, I'm not sure if you can read it, but it's basically a shape which is a sphere, and I'm giving him a radius 0.1. So the sphere is very small. So getting to the nice part of SDFs, I can have a shape which is a union of two spheres. And right now it's only one sphere here because both of them are the same size in the same position. But using something like translate, we can move one of those spheres to the left, and now we see two spheres. we can move them a little bit closer so they overlap. And now starts the fun part. Most of the operations in SDF land, because they are distances, we can apply some smoothing to them. So now I'm doing union with a roundness of 0.01. So you can see they are not exactly interconnected. They have this like nice smoothing to them. And if we increase that value over, like, they become more and more smooth and now form like a, you know, a pill kind of shape. So this is something that SDFs give us that is not really there with things like constructive solid geometry or other ways of describing shapes. And that part, that smooth part, was what I was really interested in. And this is an output from like a meshing software. This one I didn't write myself, it's just displaying OBJ, so like an object file that I exported. And this is like all the vertices are there and you can 3D print there. So that's perfect for our use. And of course, like this being programming language, we can export some of these things into a function. So now I have translated sphere, so I don't need to repeat myself. And the translated sphere returns a sphere which is translated. So I can make two small ones, one big one in the middle, and build up some interesting shapes. And we can swap union for difference. And now we get the big sphere with the two ones cut out. So we can still see how smooth it is. I just rotated it a little bit. There's a little hole on the other side as well. So, and there's also, of course, intersection, which gives us intersections of two spheres, for example. And of course, we can use different shapes. I just focus on the sphere for like brevity here, but there's a lot of different primitives you can work with to build up those shapes. So this all being like mathematics, there's simple transformations we can do to have infinitely repeating spheres and bunch of infinitely repeating spheres in x and y coordinates. So this really isn't something that interested me in this during this time here, but you can use that. It's like, so all of the tools actually are gonna be open sourced. I just need time to write readmes and examples. And of course, like we can repeat things in a polar way as well. And this is like a very brief introduction to what I've built, which is this way of describing shapes as a way of like describing them using nested arrays of basically describing what I want on the screen. And now comes the interesting part, which is combining this with the other library I told you about, which is about simulating different behaviors. So this is a bunch of code. We're not gonna go through all of it, but believe me, like in terms of brevity, it's still much shorter than what I would have to write by hand to get the same behavior. So I'm describing these behaviors in a very like declarative way, where I'm saying I want some points to repel each other and be attracted to the center so they don't flow away at all. And then if they hit each other, both of them become static. So it's basically that, not algae growth, but what was it? The underwater one. Coral, yeah, exactly. It's basically a coral still happening in 2D, but you can see already we can grab those points from here, apply the same functions we did before, and grow out shapes that start to look more interesting and start to resemble something from the nature. So here is a short animation, which is, oh yeah, all of these tools don't run in real time, so it takes some time to render them. So to build up this, I wrote another small thing that basically captures frame by frame, and then I can combine them into a video. So it doesn't run as fast, but I was more interested in the outputs and not really an animation in here. So this is a space colonization algorithm, so the one that grows like a fungus, but instead of just growing on a flat surface, it's growing between two circles. So it's constrained by two spheres, and it's trying to fit inside of there and still grow out. So yeah. So this brings me to like one of the points of this residency was to kind of like circling back, connect this to the city of Spokane. And at some point the air quality got very bad, so I got interested in that while building all of those things and found out a data set from last, I think, 20 years or so, and generated this like simple shapes. On the top left is 2010 and bottom right is 2017. 2018 doesn't have full data because we're in the middle of the year. January is on the top, and then it goes clockwise around throughout the year. and as much as pollution you have during like one of those months, the more grown out the shape gets. So we're getting something that looks very smooth because of all the SDF, or the sign distance function I told you about, but it represents like a real physical phenomenon. And yeah, again, that looks like a nice bracelet, I think, or something interesting you could print and wear. So we are getting really close to the finish line. Here's like a bunch of things that I've made, and that all of them are gonna be open sourced. Some of them sooner, some of them later. Behaviors is that library for making growing out the things. Hiccup SDF and display SDF and hiccup SDF to OBJ are tools for working with sign distance functions, and the last one is for exporting them for 3D printable results. And last one is actually a tool for tools. So I really needed a way to like see what I was doing. So I made this, which I called unimaginatively sketchbook, which allows me to like dump bunch of simple like single file like codes basically into a directory, run this and generate like small miniatures of what is inside. So I can see, like, I don't need to remember by name what each file was. I can just open this and see, oh yeah, I'm interested in that. Let's play with that a little bit more. Yeah, so circling back to the beginning, I mean, this is basically what happened for almost 4 weeks I've been here. It's been like, first week has been really hard because there's been a lot of things not working. But then once I settled upon something that I found out I really enjoy, it was this interesting space where like every not sleeping moment was like a new idea. And I think like, yeah, residency is awesome for that. So thanks again, guys. And I can show you that sketchbook if you're interested, maybe to prove that it's working at least. Let me see.